Hello and welcome to this webinar that's part of this year's Ag Smart Money Week, brought to you by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Center for Ag Profitability and Nebraska Extension with support from the North Central Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network. I'm Shannon Sand, Extension Educator and Agricultural Economist with the Center for Ag Profitability. Through daily webinars this week, Ag Smart Money Week aims to equip farmers and ranchers with the latest tools, information, and strategies to improve their financial management and risk management to build success in their business. You can find the full schedule and registration information on the Center for Ag Profitability's website, www.cap.unl.edu/smartmoney. This webinar on understanding annual cow costs will highlight important strategies to calculate the economic unit cost of production for cow-calf enterprises and explain the big three categories to cost. It will also cover 5 ways to reduce unit cost of production. To present, we are really lucky to be joined by Berger, a beef systems educator with Nebraska Extension. We invite any questions during the presentation to be typed into the chat box or the Q&A. Aaron, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you very much. Well, appreciate the opportunity to be on tonight and talk about this topic. It, in my mind, really is timely as we think about the time of year we're in. For those of you who have spring calving cows, this is the time of year when we get those calves weaned and we kind of close the book, so to speak, on this year's calf crop. For me, somewhere around this November 1st date is kind of the date I use to start for spring calving cows in terms of tracking their costs going to the next year. So in my mind, even though the year end isn't quite here, for our spring calving cows, for many folks, we've kind of closed the books. We've weaned the calves on those, and we're getting ready to start our next fiscal year in terms of cost production. So I want to provide a little bit of groundwork tonight in terms of helping you understand where we're going to go. We're going to talk about annual cow cost and what are the different categories of cost involved with that. And we're going to look at this economically. And what I mean by that is no free land, no free labor, no free money. So if you own the land and you work on the ranch and you've financed that, we're going to say that you need to pay yourself a fair wage for what you would earn if you went to work for somebody else doing similar kind of work. When I say no free land, that land has value. So we're going to separate the cow-calf enterprise from the land enterprise. We're going to, on paper anyway, ask the cows to pay fair market value for the rental rate for that land, whether that's so much per pair per month or so much per acre. We're going to separate those enterprises and make sure that the cows are paying their fair share, but not more than their fair share. And then no free money. And so what I mean by that is you have a capital investment that you've made in this operation. You've got capital invested in the cows and the land and the equipment. And so you should expect some return on that investment. Now, I'll let you decide what that is, but you should expect some return on that. So as we think about the economics analysis, that's what we're going to talk about in terms of cost. So I just wanted to hit that first, okay? So let's just talk about what the big costs are for cow-calf enterprise. And so, Shannon, we can let folks weigh in here a little bit if they want to chat, weigh in on the chat box in terms of what do they think the big costs are. So folks, you're welcome to come on. Highlight what do you think are the big costs, big categories of cost as we think about a cow-calf enterprise.
Feed, hay, mineral, vet. Those are just some that are coming through right now.
All right, so somebody said feed, okay? And I think feed is a big one, okay? Feed is certainly probably the number one expense. So when I say feed, I'm not just talking about feed that we would deliver to the cows, whether that's hay or cake or silage or something else. That's all feed that they utilize throughout the year. So this includes pasture and harvested feed, okay? So that's certainly the biggest cost to the cow-calf enterprise. And so even if you own the land and you put up the hay, we're going to put an economic value to that. So if you could sell that hay to somebody else, your neighbor, what would be its market value? That's what we're going to ask the cows to pay because that's the value. So we're doing this on an economic analysis. And then if we think about the pasture that you own, you could rent that pasture out to somebody else. And so let's identify what the value of that grass is, and we're going to ask the cows on paper to pay for that. So when we think about pasture and harvested feed, that's certainly our number one expense economically to the cow herd in Nebraska. So typically, when I look at annual cow costs, somewhere around 40 to 70% of annual cow costs can be attributed to the feed side. Again, grazed feed, harvested feed, think here salt and mineral. If it goes in the cow's mouth, we're going to charge her for it at an economic basis. That's typically what it's at. So feed is number one. I saw someone else come up. I think they said labor. Okay.
Yep.
So I'll put number two down here is labor and equipment. All right. And I'm going to put labor and equipment because we often use labor and equipment interchangeably. Okay. What I mean by that is, I don't know if I remember growing up 30 years ago in the Sandhills of Nebraska, and there was still quite a few hay crews then. They would hire high school kids, college kids, and they got to the place where they no longer hired those. And now you see bigger equipment and one or two guys putting up the hay that 6 to 8 people did before. So we have this labor equipment relationship that I think we need to be real about. We often replace labor with equipment, but guess what? We have to have labor to run equipment. And those two things are tied together. So when I look at annual cow costs, I put those, kind of lump those together as a category. They tend to be the number two cost. Okay. Number three, anybody have any ideas on what number three might be?
We had a few people put in depreciation and then another one that was property and income taxes.
Okay. So I'm going to just touch on the property and income tax one. That really ties back to this feed one up here. If you remember up here, we talked about the cost of pasture and harvested feed. So if I have this pasture, it has an economic value. What I mean by that is I don't have to provide that grass to my own cows. I could lease that grass to somebody else. So this is two different enterprises. I have a land enterprise that I own the land and I can run my own cows on it, or I could take in cows, right? So that's an expense to the cow herd. They need to pay me on paper anyway, fair market value for the grass. So I appreciate what we said about taxes because that's a big cost in Nebraska, but really that's a land ownership expense. It's not a cow expense. Now the cows need to pay for the grazing on the land, but they only should pay fair market value for that. Okay. So then coming back to, someone said depreciation. And I don't know what you were thinking there. If you were thinking about depreciation on cows or replacement cost, that is the number three one. So
That's what they said, yeah.
Cow depreciation, okay. And sometimes we call that replacement cost. Okay, I'll just call it cow depreciation for tonight. But that's the number three. So a number four, we might put down here bull expense or breeding expense, okay. That often comes up. But when I look at categories of cost, these tend to be the big ones. Now, are there some other costs that we could put in there? Yes, there are. But these tend to be the big ones. And so we'll talk about these some tonight. But just keep this in mind. Obviously, feed's number one, labor and equipment number two, and number three is cow depreciation. Actually, this number two and number three, depending on the economic conditions, they can flip-flop. And so that's what's a little bit sobering, I think, sometimes. And I'll show an example here later. When you look at the cost, you look at the economic cost of cow depreciation. If anybody's buying $3,500 bred females, this might be a little sobering. But just think about the cost of that. That cow was bought for $3,500. She's going to become a sale way up cow at some point, and that's a big depreciation. And we'll talk about that. Okay. All right. So those are our big costs. Okay. So now let's just go back a little bit, and I want to talk about unit cost of production. And so we're going to focus tonight on understanding cost of production. We've got costs in the numerator and units produced in the denominator. So units produced in this case, this applies to if you're putting up hay or putting a pound of gain on a stocker or a yearling or producing a weaned calf. We have the cost of producing that weaned calf in the denominator. Units produced is the number of calves we produce in total in the, or cost is the numerator, excuse me, units produced is the denominator. And so we're thinking about this relationship, and we want to understand what's happening with our cost divided by units produced, divided by weaned calves, okay? So let's just talk a little about two types of cost. is this is going to simplify it, but it really helps me think about this. There's really two types of cost in the numerator. There are what we'll call direct cost, okay? And direct costs are those things that increase incrementally for every cow I have in production. So if I get another cow, my costs are going to increase. So think with me, if I add a cow, am I going to need more ear tags? I am. Am I going to need more vaccine? Yes. Am I going to need some more protein supplement? Yes. Okay. My vet expenses are going to go up. Vaccine, preg check, all those things. If I add a cow and that costs go up because a cow is added, that's a direct cost, directly attributed to adding one more unit of production. On the other hand, if I have another cost, sometimes you'll hear this called overheads. Okay. Overhead costs are things that don't necessarily change when I increase the number of cows that I have. So if I had 100 cows and I go buy 5 more cows, I have 105 cows. Am I going to go buy another tractor, another four-wheeler, another working facility, another barn, calving barn shed? Probably not going to add anything else. Probably not going to hire somebody else just because I added 5 cows. Those are overhead costs, costs that don't change very much, usually until I add a unit of labor. So if I decide, you know what, I've got 300 cows and I'm going to buy 200 more cows. Now I've got 500 cows and I think I need to hire somebody. 500 cows, I think I'm going to have to hire somebody. So I go hire someone to come work for me. Well, when I hire someone, what are they going to want? A pickup to drive, a four-wheeler to ride, probably a place to live if I provide that. I'm going to need to provide some additional overheads for them to take care of cows. And so overhead costs are kind of one of those things that there's a basic level that you often need just to be in production to have the cows. And then once you reach some threshold level, oftentimes when you add a unit of labor, not always, but when you add a unit of labor, then your overhead costs jump again. So that's just important to remember because these overhead costs are a big deal. They really are a major driver for our expense. That's that labor and equipment part that we were talking about there as far as our number 2 cost, okay? All right, so we've got these direct costs and we've got overhead costs. So let me just show you what this looks like graphically. All right, so on the bottom here, I have overhead costs in red. Okay, I'll just tip this a little better so you can see that. All right. And overhead costs are things like your tractor, your trailer, your four-wheeler, your working facility, things like that, that if I add another cow, my costs really don't change very much, hardly at all, okay? Again, if I have 100 cows and I add 5 more cows, not going to add much in terms of overheads. Now, if I really make a big jump, then that might change, okay? So this, you have to think about this critically, but just think about that from an overhead standpoint. Direct costs, again, things like ear tags, vaccine, protein supplement, salt mineral. For every cow I add in production, those costs are going to increase. For every cow I have, and I'm going to spend more total dollars on direct costs. Well, on the green line here, in this case, is my revenue, or if we think about it, calf sales, coal cow sales, things like that, that's my revenue side. Where my green line here crosses my blue line, that's my break even, okay? And so obviously we can change some things in terms of trying to increase profitability. Right now, the slope of this line is much more to the up than it has been in the past because why? The value of our production, right? Calves are worth a lot more than they were 3-4 years ago. So the slope of this line is more, instead of at a 45, maybe it's more at like a 60-degree angle. Sometimes when calf prices are low, it's less. So this green line, this revenue line, is really not something we control a ton, right? So we can have some control in terms of marketing, but we probably have more control over the cost side in terms of managing our costs. So, as we think about overhead costs, any of you who are out there know this, if you've priced a pickup recently, or a chute, or a trailer, or a four-wheeler, a tractor, a bale buster, whatever it is, in terms of equipment, those costs continue to come up. They continue to increase, okay? And so as you think about your own operation, think about what are direct costs and overhead costs. And again, I put overhead down here as labor cost as well, the cost to hire someone to do the work. And so you might say, well, my labor costs aren't very much because I do the work. Well, that's a problem. You need to pay yourself what's fair, or at least recognize the value of that. What would it cost to hire someone to do the work that you do? What would it cost to pay someone to replace yourself? And that's, I think, what's being fair here economically about our cost. All right. So those are our overhead costs, direct costs. Questions on that? I guess if people have questions on this before we go on, I'll let you type that in the chat box. Okay. Any questions?
I'm not seeing any at the moment, but I'll shout at you if I see anything, okay?
All right, great. All right, so that's kind of a broad overview of direct cost, overhead cost. Again, remember our big categories. First is feed, both grazed, fed, feed. Second would be our labor and equipment, and then third, cat appreciation. So let's just think about now, how can we reduce cost production? There's really 5 ways. So as you think about, we've got cost in the numerator, units produced in the denominator. We have this relationship here. How can we try to find ways to reduce cost production? So this is where you can type in the chat box or come on and give us your perspective. There's 5 different ways to do this. So just shout out what you think are ways to do that. Again, cost in the numerator, units produced in the denominator.
So I
All
see
right.
increase units, raise more days of the year, and I see again produce more units.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so let's say I've got cost in the numerator. Okay. If I can keep my cost the same, if I can find a way to keep my cost the same, I got cost in the numerator and I keep them the same. They don't go up. And I can find a way to increase my units. What's going to happen? Well, my cost production is going to go down, right? My costs basically stayed the same, but I produced more units. So that's going to reduce my unit cost production. Okay, that's a good one. Okay, another one I saw come in. What if I can increase my costs, but my production increases at a more rapid rate? And that's what we try to do all the time. If you open any trade magazine, the promise of a product usually is if you use this product, you're going to produce more units. Okay. So your cost is going to go up because you're buying our product, but guess what? You're going to produce more units of product. So your cost production is going to go down. That's the advertisement that you often see. Use this implant, use this product. It'll make you more profitable because they're saying if you spend money here, you're going to be more productive. And so your cost production may actually go down. Okay. All right. There's some more.
I see cut costs.
Okay. Yep. All right. So what if I can cut my costs and keep my production the same? That would reduce my cost production. And we often think about how can I find a way to cut costs but still keep production? That's a common one that we hear or think about. All right. Now there's 2 more. All right. So we've got keep costs the same, increase production. We've got increase costs, but increase production at a faster rate. Okay. Okay. Reduce cost. Okay. Someone said reduce cost. Okay. So what would happen if I drastically cut costs and I still reduce production, but my costs were cut at a greater rate than my production was? That's going to reduce my cost production, right? So that's something that we often don't think about. But if I can find ways to significantly reduce cost, even if it does reduce my production, it may improve my profitability. You don't see that talked about in a trade magazine very often. Usually the focus is always produce more, produce more. But there are situations where sometimes you can cut costs and you are going to have a negative impact on your production, but it's not at the same rate. Okay. All right. Okay. There's one more. All right. This is the one we all want to do, right? This is the one we all want to figure out how to do. Can I sometimes find a way to cut my cost, but also simultaneously increase production? If I can do that, that's a home run. Now, that doesn't happen very often, but there are some situations I've seen where maybe someone's business model has changed. And I'll just pick on January, February calving. Maybe historically, feed was really inexpensive, fuel, labor, equipment was inexpensive, and that made sense economically. But it's a cold time of year to calve. There's often more calf loss. So sometimes I've seen people who've shifted their calving date to a different time of year. Their costs have gone down drastically, and they're losing less calves because they're not calving in a bitter cold time of year, and their production actually goes up. So that's an example that we don't often see. If you can do this, you want to do a lot of that. If you can find ways to cut cost and increase productivity, that's a home run every time. Okay. So this is the 5 ways that we can reduce cost of production. Okay. If you figure out another one, let me know. I haven't figured out another one, but if there may be that I haven't thought of, but this is the 5 ways that we reduce unit cost production. Okay. And so as we think about that, that's the major driver for us in terms of reducing cost production. Okay, so if we come back here, we look at our big 3 in terms of our cost. Okay, remember our overhead cost is a major chunk of this. And so if we can find ways to reduce overhead costs or direct costs in a way that can increase our margin, so we have less cost but still have the same productivity, that's a good opportunity. Okay. So one thing I wanted to talk about a little bit tonight, because of just looking at what bred cow sales have been and what they're predicted to be, and this is a major cost that I would say a decade ago I didn't hear people talk about very much. I think it's talked about more now, but looking at cow depreciation as expense. So that was the number 3 category of expense on our 3. We had, remember, feed cost, and then we had labor and equipment, and then we had cow replacement or cow depreciation. So let's just work through an example here. So I've got purchase price here, which is that PP acronym, or development cost if you're developing your own replacements, okay, minus sales price or salvage value, okay? So I kind of like to use sales price because there's times when it may be the most profitable thing for me to do is to sell a bred cow rather than retain her till she has to leave the herd because she's open or old, okay? Now that goes contrary to what often we think about, but this is in the numerator. So we got purchase price or development cost minus sales price or salvage value divided by productive years. All right, so if I want to reduce my cow depreciation expense, there are 3 ways to do it. Okay, as you look at this relationship, there's 3 ways to try to reduce cow depreciation. So again, you're welcome to come on the chat box. Let me know what you would see as being one of the ways to reduce cow depreciation. So we've got this purchase price or development cost minus her sales price or salvage value divided by productive years. Anybody want to weigh in? Okay, increase cow productive years. Okay, that's right. If I can find ways to have my cow be more productive, if I can get more years of production out of her, maybe on average, right now I get 4 to 5 calves. What if my herd average instead of 4 to 5 could be 5 to 6? That actually would change my cost production, right? Because I'm getting more calves produced, and that's in my denominator, dividing that then into my numerator, my cost, okay? Yep. If I can get more years, more calves out of that cow, that's going to reduce my cow depreciation expense per calf produced. Okay. Yep, exactly. Anyone else got one? All right, sell the cow before she starts to depreciate. Okay. Yeah, so if I can find a way to get more value from the cow when she leaves the herd, okay? So oftentimes over here, we think about the salvage price, right? Or we call it salvage. let's maybe think about it as sales price. Because if you think about salvage, for a lot of us, we're thinking about that old junker car that we took to the, just to weight it up. I mean, basically, we weighed it up, right? We took it in, they gave us scrap metal price. And that's often sometimes what we think about with cows, right? They're at the end of their productive life. We take them in, they weigh them up, we get money. Now, this year, weigh up cows have been really good money, and that's been helpful on this side of the equation. But if I can find ways to get more value from the cow when she leaves the herd, that's going to decrease my numerator expense. Okay, so there's one other one. This is probably pretty obvious, but if I can get a cow into the herd at less cost, have her leave the herd at a greater value, and get more productive years out of her. So those are the three ways to reduce cow depreciation. Those are the three ways that we can do that. So let's just work through an example real quick. And I'm going to use an extreme example, but it's more real than maybe we want to realize. Okay. So let's just say we're going to go, I don't know, I've seen some bred cow sales starting to get warmed up here. Let's go buy some really nice bred heifers here in December. So they're going to be February calvers. They're F1 baldies. They're bred right. All the bells and whistles. I mean, they do everything but play the piano. Okay. They're really nice. Okay. So let's say they're $3,500. So we're going to go buy these bred heifers at $3,500. Okay. Now, what are they going to be worth when they leave the herd? Anybody have any ideas? Let's just make the math simple. Let's say they're worth $1,500 when they leave the herd. And that's kind of close to where weigh-up cows are right now. Some are going to bring a little more than that. The challenge is the red heifer you buy at the top of the market, you rarely sell her at the top of the weigh-up cow market. Sometimes, but not very often, okay? So let's just say $1,500, keep the math simple, as her sales price. So this was her purchase price here. Here's her sales price, all right? Now, how many productive years are we going to get out of her? Okay. How many productive years? Okay,
Five. I see a lot of 5s and 6s.
Yeah, 4 to 5. Okay. And I think you're right. Let's just use 5 to keep the math simple. Okay. A lot of people times will say 10. They always remember the cow that had 10 calves. She left the herd at 12 years of age, but that's a rare specimen. Okay. We wish every cow would do that, but 4 to 5 is pretty common on most herds, and some are less than that. Okay. But so we'll just use 5 to keep the math simple. Okay. So 5 years that she's productive. Okay. 5 years. All right. So I've got 3,500 minus 15. Okay. So that's going to be $2,000. And I'm going to get 5 productive years out of her. So we're going to divide that by 5. Well, 2,000 divided by 5 in my book is $400 of cow depreciation. Now, you don't get a bill in the mail that says you owe $400 per cow for depreciation, but did value leave the business? Did you buy her for $3,500? Did she get sold for $15,000? Yes. Now, again, this is a little bit of an extreme example, and I know that, but I do think it kind of gets your attention because there are cows bringing this price, and there will be cows that bring this price, and we might not get $1,500 out of her, right? Does every cow we buy at the sale make it back to the sale barn? Oh, nuts, right? No, they don't. Some of those cows die. And so we got to figure out some death loss. So let's just figure 2% death loss a year. Okay. So just for fun, let's just say on average over the life of this cow, she's worth $2,000. And I'm going to figure a 2% death loss. Okay. So 2%, 0.02. So basically $40 a year in death loss. Okay. So that's $40 a year in death loss. That's the cow that Ivan Rush would say they get turnip disease. That's when all 4 legs turn up. You've probably seen that. Okay. All right. So 40 bucks in death loss. So now we got 400 plus 40 in death loss, cows that don't make it back to the barn. Well, we've got $440 per year in cow depreciation. Ugh, that's kind of a big number. Honestly, right now, cow depreciation in some cases may be your second biggest cost instead of labor and equipment. Because as we look at cows being bought right now, depending on how many productive years and what the salvage value or sales price is when they leave the herd, there's going to be some significant depreciation occur with those cows. One of the other challenges is that the cows bought at the top of the price cycle typically get sold as a weigh-up cow at the bottom of the price cycle, not for their current market value as far as a weigh-up cow. So again, this is not to say that you shouldn't go buy cows. That's not what I'm saying. Just recognize if you're buying cows, depreciation is a big expense. And so it's a non-cash expense. You don't get a bill in the mail that says you owe $500 per cow per year for depreciation, but it's real. It is real value that's being leaving the business. And so as you think about annual cow costs, this is a big one. Okay.
We have a
Yes.
question. They're
Yeah.
asking, how do you account for year by year changes in the market? Because if you just, I can understand that. If you just think of the last year and a half, I mean,
Yeah.
that was a big change.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So I think that's a great question. And it's one that's challenging to deal with, right? Because your total cow herd value in terms of their inventory value today is drastically higher than it was 3 years ago. What I mean by that is if you were to have a cow dispersal 3 years ago versus having a cow dispersal today, your total herd value has gone up significantly. But I think it's good to remember also, if we look historically, cow prices go up, cow prices go down. And so just recognizing some of what's happening with that, that usually a cow bought at the top of the cycle is going to get sold when? Towards the bottom of the cycle when prices are lower. And so recognizing some of these price cycles that happen and what's happening with depreciation is important. Even today, I mean, if we think about way up cow prices today, even if it's $1,700, $1,800, and let's just say we made this $3,000, we're still dealing with, $1,300, $1,400 of depreciation. Even at 5 calves, we're still looking at somewhere around $300 easily in cow depreciation, plus some death loss. So it's a real expense, and it's just paying attention to that, recognizing what's going on, and then also just saying, if I keep this cow today, which I'm not saying you should or shouldn't, you have to think about the economics for yourself. But what's the projected value of that cow going forward in terms of calves she's going to produce? And then what's she going to be worth when she leaves the herd? What's her going to weigh up price, her salvage value, her trade-in value going to be? Okay. So again, there's actually 3 ways to reduce cow depreciation. Try to get a cow into the herd for less cost. Try to get more for her when she leaves the herd, and try to get more calves out of her. Okay. All right. The greatest opportunity I see for many folks is to try to focus on this one here. How do I capture more value from the cow when she leaves the herd? So maybe if I've got young cows that came up open, instead of selling them as a weigh-up cow, I rebreed them and try to market them as fall breds. Or maybe it's I look to get a cow into the herd at less cost. Could I buy a middle-aged cows or maybe older cows that are going to be less expensive, maybe just get a couple years out of them, and then I've got less cost coming in? Or this productive years part, is there a way to get another year or two out of those cows and increase the number of total productive years I get? So those are ways to think about this cow depreciation expense and some of the costs with that.
How do you
All
account
right.
for the income from a bred cow or heifer versus developing your own replacement with a lower bred up percentage? And you have to wait a year for developed. My God, we've got a bunch of them coming in. Sorry, I was
Okay.
like, they're going too fast. And you have to wait a year for a developed heifer to calve.
Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
that's a great question. So I think you have to look at what's it cost me to get a female into the herd. Okay. So a bred female. So obviously they have a value at weaning, right? So they've got a value at weaning. And then you've got development costs. Okay. That's what DC is, development cost. And then you're going to have some opens that you're going to sell. And then you end up with your breds. Okay. All right. So you have to think about what are all my costs to get a bred female into the herd. So that you have to just know what my costs are. And so one of the questions is, can I develop a bred female myself, or am I better off buying a bred female from somebody else? Now, I understand the argument that those raised on your operation know the resources, you know the quality, And so if you want to give a little advantage to them, I wouldn't argue with you there. But it's really understanding what are my costs to get a bred female into the herd. Okay, what's the cost of that? What's her value at weaning? What's it, my feed cost, breeding expense, all those things that go in. Okay. So that's my what's it cost to get me one in? And then it's on the other side is how do I capture more value from the cow that leaves the herd? So for example, I'm a fan of a long breeding season and a short calving season. And some of you might be like, okay, wait a second. This guy doesn't understand biology. You can't have that. You can't have a long breeding season and a short calving season. But actually you can. So with a long breeding season and a short calving season, I'm identifying those cows that are going to calve early. And then the later calving cows that are bred, I'm going to sell to somebody else. So I'm increasing the value of those cows that if I pulled the bulls early, they would be sold as a non-bred cow, an open cow. And so I try to capture more value from them when they leave the herd. Okay. So you always have to be wrestling with, then also what are my overhead costs? So if you remember that my overhead costs don't change very much. So I have to be thinking about if I can run more cows and my overhead costs don't change, if I add an additional cow, what are the costs that really increase? Well, her direct costs, right? Anything that's directly related to having her in the herd, if it's supplemental feed, additional hay, vaccine, things like that, you want to pay attention to that. But if your overheads, labor, equipment really don't change, recognize that as being the case and say, okay, if I add a cow, what are the additional costs that I have? Or if I have pasture, let's say I've got pasture that I can run 300 cows and I'm really stocked right now at 260. Well, I'm understocked. I can add additional cows, especially if it's owned grass, right? That grass has value if it's not being fully utilized. How can I add additional units? And what, if I do add additional cows, what costs actually go up? So those are things to wrestle with that. Sometimes you can buy replacement cows that are good quality, that maybe are middle-aged or older cows that have less depreciation. And so it just depends on your goals and your objectives, what you're willing to do. For some folks, they don't want to bring in any outside cows. They want to have all home raised, which is fine. I understand and respect that. For other folks, they're willing to buy and sell some cows as the market opportunity presents. So not sure I answered your question very well, but you have to understand what are my costs coming in? What's it cost me to get a bred in myself if it's home raised or if it's purchased? And then how do I capture value from the cow when she leaves? Okay. Yep, those are good questions. Okay. Shannon, anything else you see there?
No.
Okay. All right. So as we think about, again, we think about cow depreciation, again, that's a big expense. It's one we don't talk about very often, or cow replacement, however you want to say it or see it. But just being mindful of that and sometimes putting some pencil to paper and looking at what are my cow replacement costs, especially in the market times we're in right now. What are some alternatives? What can I do? How can I address this? Okay. All right. Good. Other questions on that?
I don't see any at this point in time.
Okay. All right. So that's cow depreciation. Okay. The other cost that I see that if you went to a bull sale this spring, bull sales were bigger. They were often more expensive. So another big expense, that was our number 4, was bull cost. Okay. So I'm not against spending money for good bulls, but I do think it's important to understand what your costs are. Okay. And so as you think about bull costs, there's major drivers here, just like we think about for a cow cost. There's the purchase price of the bull. Okay. And then hopefully we have what is his sales price, right? When he leaves the herd. And then divided by cows that are pregnant. Okay. So I'm not going to go through the math tonight, but I'd encourage you to sit down and just think about, what did I spend for bulls? What's their value when they leave the herd? And one of the challenges is we don't always get that money back, right? We had death loss on cows. I would say death loss on bulls is actually higher as a percentage, okay? Especially that real high dollar bull. He's the one that breaks his leg or you find him dead in a blowout. That's the Those are the ones that get struck by lightning. I don't know why it's the high dollar ones, but so your purchase price and your sales price, and then number of cows that actually got pregnant. So I encourage you sometimes just to sit down and figure that out. The other thing you have to make sure you include is annual bull costs, okay? Because those bulls like to eat. Okay, so you got to feed the bull, and you're probably going to get a semen test on him, and you're probably going to have some other vet expenses. So don't forget those things as well. Just the cost to own the bull plus depreciation on the bull divided by a number of cows that were actually the bull got pregnant. So bull cost, that's kind of our number 4. I didn't jump into the feed cost very much tonight. I think feed cost is one that you can fairly accurately come up with. Think about what you're spending in terms of feed. Those are more common. Labor and equipment, I didn't spend much time on as well. That's a big category, and we could spend a long time on that. When you look at the cost to hire somebody today, when you look at the cost of a pickup, a tractor, a four-wheeler, a bale processor, just all those pieces of equipment continue to go up. And so we have to think about how do we address these overhead costs that, as far as labor and equipment, and find ways to creatively reduce those. And so it's not necessarily just running more cows. Sometimes we can do some things to reduce labor and equipment as well, but you have to be purposeful about understanding and thinking about that. So Shannon, I see it's almost 6:45. I guess I would throw it up or throw it out. Any questions as we wrap up?
I'm gonna guess in this bull cost, like you kind of mentioned, but you would also account for death loss, like a
Yeah.
percentage of death loss, like we did with the cow earlier too, right?
Yep. Yep. That's
Yeah.
right. Yep. Yep. There's death loss on here as well.
Yeah, because like you said, it is always the luck. It's when you buy the really expensive one, something happens, it breaks its leg. At least I feel like that's what I have seen and experienced.
Yeah. That's often how it goes. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I would just throw it out. If you have a question on any of the content I covered tonight, you're welcome to shoot me an email.
We have
Um,
a couple come through.
okay. So
So,
go
in
ahead.
the depreciation conversation, would you use the $440 for 2024 and have differing numbers each year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good question. So what I try to do is be aware of what's happening with cow depreciation, right? So what I mean by that is your cow herd value is going to go up with the market. Your cow herd value is going to go down. What I want to know is what is happening with my own herd. What does it cost me to get a bred cow into the herd? Whether I go buy her or I raise her myself. What's the cost, or excuse me, what's the revenue? What's the value of cows leaving the herd? And what's the relationship between the two? So what did it cost me to get a cow into the herd this year? What was the value of a cow leaving the herd? And then what did I produce in terms of calves on average? And so what I really encourage you to do is look at that for yourself personally. Now, if you're going out and buying the bred females, you know what your purchase price is. That's what you wrote the check for. If you're developing them yourself, understand what your costs are. So that heifer calf that had a value at weaning, which this year's quite a bit, let's say she is worth $1,500 at weaning. If I choose to keep her, she had a market value of $1,500. Now, that wasn't my cash cost, but I could have turned her into cash, right? I could have got $1,500 for her. What's it going to cost me to develop her? And then what's she going to have a value as when she comes into the herd? So it's really about thinking about that relationship for yourself, understanding what's happening with that so that you know what's occurring with cow depreciation. Again, this goes up and down, and you have to just recognize what's taking place. And I don't encourage people to make drastic decisions. It's really just first being aware what's taking place, and then can I do anything to maybe take advantage of this or find ways to reduce cat appreciation. So I don't know if that answered your question very well, but that's how I would try to think about that.
Yeah. And then someone asked, what percentage do you lose of your herd yearly?
Yeah, good question. So A common number is around 2%. Is now that's a breeding cows. Now calf loss typically ranges in that 2 to 5, sometimes a little more than that. But if we think about mature cows, typically a kind of a industry number is about 2%. Okay.
Mhm. Oh, the one said yes. That was what they were asking on the depreciation.
Okay.
So,
All right,
yeah.
great. Yeah. And so one thing I would share is I put my email up here, and you can find me on the internet very easily. If you have questions around the content we covered tonight, or if I said something and you're like, that didn't quite make sense, or I'm not real sure what you were referring to, shoot me an email, give me a phone call. I'd be happy to talk through this. And also provide you with kind of a sample one-page budget of a cow cost sheet. It's kind of a basic one. But again, as we think about, the cost structure, cow costs have really jumped a lot in the last 5, 6 years.
Yeah, the cost of production has dramatically changed. I mean, even if you're just looking at like someone who just does grazing and cow calf, it's those rental rates. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Now, again, if you own the ground, you might say, well, my ground's owned, so it really doesn't cost me much. But again,
yeah.
remember, we're doing an economic analysis. So you could rent that grass out to somebody else.
For a lot, I mean, depending on your situation, potentially more. There's a lot of what if scenarios happening.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so
yeah,
I'm
when you
not
do
here to
this.
try to encourage you to get out of cows or sell all your cows. That's
No.
what I'm doing. But I am just saying, as you think about your costs, try to be real about where's value being created in the operation. So what's the value of your labor? What's the value of your grass? What's the value of the money you have invested in that cow herd? What's happening with labor, or what's happening with equipment? Just recognize those things so that you don't get caught unawares, I guess, is what I'm saying in terms of knowing your costs. So. All right. Anything else, Shannon?
I'm not seeing anything at this moment. Let's give it just a minute though, just in
Okay.
case.
So that's also my office number here. You're sure welcome to call me on that as well. Oops, sorry, that's not my office number. This is my office number. I just gave you out my home phone number, which is fine too, but this is my office number. So,
Okay. Well, maybe we can try and blur that in the recording portion.
that's
Okay.
fine. It doesn't matter.
Okay. I was just like, oh no. All right. I don't see anything else. So last call for everybody.
Okay.
Okay. So thank you all for joining us today during Ag Smart Money Week. Free webinars continue through Friday, and you can find the schedule and registration information at cap.unl.edu/smartmoney. And have a great evening. Thank you again, Aaron, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for letting me be on.
Yeah, thank you.